Good morning and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodholt. You might think the story is over. This week we're looking at the small book of Jonah and trying to see the whole story, not just the well-known parts about Jonah being swallowed by the fish. And when we come to the end of chapter 3, you might think the story was over. After all his troubles, Jonah has indeed gone to Nineveh, preached his message that God was going to destroy them, and they repented and God forgave them. That sounds like a Bible story, beginning, middle, and end. But that's not where the story of Jonah ends, and that ought to tell us something. It ought to tell us that there's yet still another point to make. And here's the thing. Jonah gets angry. Embarrassed might be another word. God told him to go and preach that Nineveh would be destroyed, and then it wasn't. Outside the city, Jonah says, "You see, God, I knew this was going to happen, and that's why I didn't want to come here in the first place. I knew you were going to forgive them, and now I look like a laughingstock and a fool. I'd rather die." And right there, we might feel a certain kinship with Jonah because we see that already he has forgotten the lesson he learned in the belly of the fish, just like we sometimes have to learn important wisdom from God over and over. In the belly of the fish, Jonah learned who he was and who God was. Jonah learned it wasn't about himself. The way we talked about it was that Jonah died to himself. But at the end of the story, it seems like Jonah has rediscovered a sense of his own self-importance. Perhaps he was all puffed up at being the prophet of God. Perhaps some of that racism was creeping back in as he waited to gloat over Nineveh's destruction. Regardless, Jonah complained to God, missing the point of the whole thing. And God answered in a surprising way. The sun was hot, so as Jonah waited outside Nineveh for the destruction he expected, God caused a plant to grow and give Jonah shade. And then God sent a worm to eat at the base of the plant so that the plant died. And Jonah got angry at that too. And that's when God said, "Is it right for you to be angry about the bush?" And he said, "Yes, angry enough to die." Then the Lord said, "You are concerned about the bush for which you did not labor and which you did not grow. It came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I not be concerned about Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" Just so, God taught Jonah about the love and grace of God. God taught Jonah that all people were God's people and that God cared for and was concerned for all people. Once again, in this little book, we find a God of amazing grace. But there's one thing more. This is the very end of Jonah, and I've always been intrigued with how the last words expressed God's care and concern for the animals too. I think that tells us that God is concerned for all creation. All creation belongs to God. And if we're going to follow God, then we've got to be concerned and care for other people and all creation too. It's not about us. Maybe like Jonah, we have to learn that over and over. It's not about us. It's about God. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.